Be me, Jack, late 20s, and aggressively average. Not destined for greatness, not crashing and burning, either just another replaceable part in a climate-controlled system. My days blur together. Juggling data tables, firing off polite email replies, and attending collaborative discussions that resolve nothing. The paycheck clears, the rent gets paid on my shoebox apartment, and my Wi-Fi bill stays justified. Peak modern achievement. For the longest time, the office existed in a kind of beige equilibrium. No chaos, no glory, just routine. Standard lineup of coworkers included Rohan, the resident tea sorcerer, soft-spoken, permanently plugged into his headphones, capable of resurrecting a dying machine with a single irritated stare. Most of the time, he just sat there, tapping away at code that might as well have been extraterrestrial script. Then there was Yusuf. The guy had been with the company since the Stone Age. He'd seen it all, and his default expression was a mix of boredom and deep, deep cynicism. He was the office oracle of pessimism. If you were excited about something, Yusuf could give you 5 reasons why it was doomed to fail. He was usually right. We weren't exactly friends, more like trench buddies. We were all in the same gray-carpeted hellscape together, trying to survive until 5 p.m. The boss was a typical manager. Didn't care about our feelings, only about deadlines and profit margins. As long as the numbers on his reports were green, he left us alone. A perfect arrangement. Life was predictable, monotonous even. I didn't realize how much I valued that monotony until Nina arrived. It started with an email, a company-wide announcement with a subject line in all caps. Welcoming our new head of people and culture. People and culture. That's what they call HR now. I remember Yusuf leaning over from his cubicle, not even looking up from his screen. He just muttered, "The first horseman has arrived." A week later, we all got a meeting request for a company culture relaunch. Mandatory attendance. We all shuffled into the big conference room. Nina stood at the front, next to a PowerPoint presentation. She had this bright, forced smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. The kind of smile that makes you want to check your wallet. She launched into a speech. It was a masterpiece of corporate jargon. She talked about shifting paradigms, fostering psychological safety, and creating a more inclusive and equitable workspace. She said the company needed to unpack its old ways and lean in to a new, more progressive future. I looked around the room. Most people were either on their phones or had that glazed-over look of someone who has died inside. Yusuf was just slowly shaking his head, a tiny, bitter smirk on his face. Nina then clicked to a new slide. It had a big, bold title, The Male Mental Wellness Initiative. She looked directly at the men in the room. Her smile softened into something that was supposed to look compassionate, but just came across as condescending. She explained that modern workplaces often fail to address the specific emotional needs of male employees. "We've been conditioned by society," she said, "to suppress our feelings, to man up." This, according to her presentation, leads to bottled-up stress and is a primary driver of toxic masculinity in the office environment. I just wanted to go back to my desk and finish a spreadsheet. Then came the kicker. Nina announced she was rolling out a new pilot program to help us get in touch with our emotional state. A woman from her team came in carrying a large box. Nina reached in and pulled out a small black plastic wristband. It looked like a cheap fitness tracker from a gas station. "These," she declared, "are biometric wellness bands." She explained that these devices would monitor our stress levels throughout the day by tracking heart rate, skin conductivity, and other metrics. The data would be sent in real time to a dashboard that she, as head of people and culture, would monitor. The goal, she claimed, was to identify employees who were approaching burnout and proactively provide them with support. It sounded like something out of a dystopian novel. One of the guys from accounting raised his hand, a brave soul. He asked if this program would apply to everyone in the company. Nina's smile tightened just a little. She explained that, for the initial pilot phase, the program would be exclusively for male employees. I couldn't help myself. I asked why. "That's a great question, Jack," she said, her voice dripping with artificial patience. "The reality is, our female colleagues already perform a disproportionate amount of emotional labor in the workplace. They are generally more in tune with their feelings and better at expressing them. This initiative is designed to help our male employees catch up. The implication was clear. We were emotionally stunted children, and she was the progressive school marm here to fix us. Youssef let out a quiet, dry cough that sounded suspiciously like a swear word. The bans were mandatory. Refusing to wear one would be noted in our performance reviews as being uncooperative with company wellness initiatives. So, we all lined up like cattle and got our electronic shackles fitted. It felt cold and foreign on my wrist, a constant reminder that I was being watched. The first few days were weird. Nothing really happened. Guys would nervously glance at their wrists, wondering what the little device was telling big sister Nina in her office. We'd joke about it at the water cooler. "Careful, Dave. Don't get too excited about that donut. You'll spike your cortisol levels." It felt intrusive and dumb, but it didn't seem to have any real-world consequences. It was just another pointless corporate exercise. That's what we thought anyway. The illusion shattered about 2 weeks in. It was a Monday morning. The boss came out of his office looking stressed. He announced that the company had been ordered to clear out its old off-site storage unit by the end of the week. This was a legendary task, a job that nobody wanted. The storage unit was ancient. It was a dusty crypt filled with decades of old files, broken furniture, and probably several families of rats. It was a physically demanding, dirty, and completely thankless job. The boss looked around the room. "I need 3 or 4 volunteers to spend the next few days over there, getting it all sorted." The silence was deafening. Everyone suddenly became intensely interested in their computer screens. The boss sighed. He turned to Nina, who had just walked in with her ever-present tablet. "Nina, you're all about synergy and team morale. Who do you recommend for this team-building opportunity?" Nina's face lit up. "Of course. Let me just consult the wellness dashboard." She tapped on her screen for a moment, a thoughtful look on her face. "Well," she said, looking up with a cheerful smile, "according to the data from this morning, Jack, Kevin, and Mark are showing the lowest stress indicators in the entire department. They're clearly in a calm, focused headspace, perfect for a project that requires methodical organization." My blood ran cold. I had been calm. I was sipping my coffee, easing into the week, and now I was being punished for it. The 3 of us looked at each other in disbelief. We were sentenced to the dust mines because a cheap plastic bracelet said we weren't stressed enough. We spent the next 3 days in that miserable storage unit. We were covered in dust. My back ached from lifting heavy boxes, and the whole experience was awful. When we got back to the office, looking like we'd survived a natural disaster, Nina walked by my desk. "See, Jack," she said, patting me on the shoulder. "A little change of scenery and physical activity can do wonders for your stress levels. Your metrics were stable the whole time." I just stared at her, too tired and angry to speak. That was just the beginning. The pattern became brutally clear over the next few weeks. A new, incredibly difficult client was brought on board. They were notorious for being demanding and rude. Guess who got assigned as their primary contacts? The 3 guys with the most stable heart rates that week. The office Wi-Fi went down. The boss needed someone to crawl under all the desks and check the cabling. Nina's dashboard was consulted. Rohan was busy on a critical server issue, so she volunteered the 2 guys who were showing the most zen-like calm. The worst was the weekend work. A huge project deadline was moved up. The boss said he needed a skeleton crew to come in on Saturday. Normally, he'd ask for volunteers or offer overtime pay. This time, he just deferred to Nina. She pulled up her dashboard and, with the clinical detachment of a drone operator, selected her targets. A team of low-stress individuals who were, according to her data, best equipped to handle the pressure without burning out. It was no longer a wellness initiative. It was a tool for assigning all the worst jobs. It was a punishment for not being perpetually on the verge of a panic attack. Complaining was useless. We tried. A few of us went to the boss. We explained that the system was unfair. He just shrugged. "Look, Nina handles HR. She says this data-driven approach maximizes efficiency by matching task-related stress to an employee's capacity. Her report says productivity is up. As long as the work gets done, I don't care how she picks people." We were trapped. The system was designed by our antagonist, and our boss, the only person with the power to stop it, was validating it because it made his life easier. Morale among the male staff plummeted. The office became a place of quiet resentment. We started seeing each other as competition. If your stress levels were lower than mine, I might get stuck with the next awful task. Youssef, of course, was immune. His baseline level of cynicism and irritation kept his bracelet in a constant state of elevated stress. He'd sit back, sipping his tea, watching the chaos unfold. "You boys need to learn," he told me one afternoon, as I was being sent to deal with a paper jam that had defeated 3 other people. In the modern world, appearing weak is a position of strength. The breaking point for me came about 2 months into this nightmare. We had a massive company-defining project. The final presentation to the client was in a week, and a critical part of the software was riddled with bugs. It was an all-hands-on-deck situation. We were all stressed. The pressure was immense. Late one evening, maybe around 7 p.m., the boss gathered the remaining team. Most people had already gone home. He said the client had requested a last-minute change that would require a complete overhaul of one module. It had to be done overnight. He needed a team to stay and pull an all-nighter. My heart sank. I was already exhausted. I'd been working 10-hour days all week. The boss looked at Nina. "Who do we have?" Nina, who was staying late to monitor the team's emotional well-being, brought up her dashboard. I could see it coming. I had been trying to stay calm all day, telling myself that panicking wouldn't help. A fatal mistake. "Well," she chirped, "it looks like Jack's stress biometrics are holding up remarkably well under pressure. He's a rock. And it seems Rohan and a couple of the junior guys are also in the green zone." I snapped, not loudly. I didn't yell, but I stood up from my desk. "Nina, I can't," I said, my voice strained. "I'm exhausted. I've been here all week. That bracelet is wrong." She gave me that patronizing smile again, the one that made me want to throw my monitor out the window. "Jack, let's not be dramatic," she said softly, as if speaking to a toddler throwing a tantrum. "Your feelings of tiredness are valid, but the objective data tells a different story. It says you have the emotional capacity to handle this. The team needs you to be a team player." Objective data, my lived experience of crushing exhaustion versus the blinking green light from a cheap piece of plastic on my wrist. And the plastic was winning. Rohan, who was also selected, just looked down. He knew there was no point in arguing. I felt completely and utterly defeated. My own body, my own feelings, were being dismissed and overruled by a spreadsheet in an HR manager's hands. It wasn't about wellness. It was about control. We stayed. We worked through the night, fueled by stale coffee and pure resentment. The sun was coming up when we finally finished. We were like zombies. As I was packing up my bag to go home and collapse, Nina came over, looking fresh as a daisy after her full night's sleep. "Great work, team," she said. "See, I knew you could handle it. The dashboard was right." I just stared at her. I didn't say a word. I just walked out. That night, a few of us ended up at a cheap bar near the office. Me, Rohan, and a couple of other guys who had been on the receiving end of Nina's data-driven management. There wasn't much talking at first, just the sound of us nursing our beers. I finally broke the silence. I vented. I told them how I felt unheard, how this whole system was a nightmare of passive-aggressive punishment. The other guys all chimed in. Everyone had a story. Everyone felt the same sense of injustice. We were isolated at work, but here, in this dingy bar, we were finally a team. Rohan had been quiet the whole time, just listening and slowly turning his wellness band around on his wrist. After I finished my rant, he looked up from the bracelet. "This thing is a piece of junk," he said, his voice low. "We know, man," one of the other guys said. "That's the problem." "No," Rohan said, a spark in his eye. "You don't understand. I mean, it's a technical piece of junk. The hardware is bottom of the barrel. The sensors are simplistic." He leaned forward, his voice getting more intense. "She thinks she has this sophisticated biometric system. She doesn't. She has a toy that gives easily manipulated readings." He looked at me. "You said she dismissed how you felt because of the objective data. What if we could change the data?" I stared at him, not quite understanding. "Let me take a look at one of these," he said. "I have an idea." He seemed so sure of himself. For the first time in months, I felt a tiny flicker of something I thought I'd lost. It was hope. That night, I barely slept. It wasn't because of exhaustion. It was a nervous energy, a wire of anticipation thrumming just beneath my skin. The next morning, Rohan was waiting for me by the coffee machine. He looked like he hadn't slept at all, but his eyes were sharp and clear. He beckoned me over to his cubicle. On his screen wasn't code, but a simple graph. On his desk lay my wellness band, hooked up to his computer with a series of makeshift clips and wires. "Okay, look," he said, keeping his voice low. I was right. It's a joke. The main sensor is a galvanic skin response, or GSR. It basically measures how much you're sweating. The other is a cheap photoplethysmography sensor, a PPG. It shines a little light into your skin to measure your pulse. He pointed to the graph. These two things combined are its entire stress algorithm. If your skin gets a little clammy and your heart rate goes up, the algorithm screams, stress. If you're cool and your pulse is steady, you're calm. This was the objective data that had been running our lives. The thing is, he continued, a grin spreading across his face, the sensor is incredibly stupid. It can't tell the difference between stress-induced sweat and, well, almost anything else. He picked up a small cup of water and put a single drop on the sensor. The graph on his screen went ballistic. The stress meter shot from green to deep crimson in a second. Moisture, he said, or friction, or vibration, or static electricity. He unplugged the band and handed it back to me. If you need to be stressed, just rub it against the fabric of your pants for 5 seconds. If you need to be really stressed, put it on your phone while it's vibrating. The sensor will think you're having a heart attack. It was so simple, so elegantly, beautifully simple. The weapon that had been used against us was a toy, and he had just handed us the instruction manual. "We need to tell the others," I said, my heart starting to beat faster for real this time. We decided to be careful. No big meetings, no company-wide emails. Rohan and I approached people one by one, in the break room, by the elevators, in the parking lot. The reaction was always the same. First, disbelief. Then, a slow dawning realization. And finally, a look of pure, unadulterated glee. It was like watching a bunch of prisoners being told their cell door was made of cardboard. Yusuf was the last person we told. We found him in his usual spot doing a crossword puzzle. We explained Rohan's discovery. He listened intently, not saying a word, just tapping his pen against the newspaper. When we finished, he put his pen down. He didn't smile. He looked at us with a kind of grim satisfaction, like a retired general being called back for one last, glorious war. "This is not a toy," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "This is a weapon, and you don't just play with a weapon. You need a strategy." He was right. A bunch of guys randomly faking stress would just look weird. We needed to be organized. That afternoon, a new private group chat appeared on our phones. It was called Regional Weather Watch. It had a generic icon of a sun and a cloud. Yusuf laid out the rules. No names, no direct talk about the plan, just coded messages. If a potentially bad task was coming, the first person to see it would post a simple message. Clouds on the horizon. If the task was confirmed and looked particularly awful, the message was, storm warning in effect. That was the signal. That meant it was time for everyone to, as Rohan put it, manually recalibrate their wellness metrics. Our first test came 2 days later. An email landed in our inboxes from one of the senior managers. The shared kitchen was a mess. Someone had apparently caused a microwave to explode by heating up a forgotten container of chili. It needed a deep clean. A message popped up in the Weather Watch chat. "Biohazard alert in the kitchen. Looks like a storm." I looked around the office. It was subtle. A guy over in accounting started tapping his foot rapidly, his hand in his pocket. I saw another guy lean back in his chair, casually rubbing his wrist against the rough fabric of the armrest. I discreetly slipped my hand under my desk and ran the band back and forth along the underside of the wooden surface. It felt ridiculous. 5 minutes later, Nina strode out of her office, tablet in hand, a determined look on her face. She was on the hunt. She walked over to the accounting department. We could hear her talking to the manager. Then we heard her say, "Oh my, the entire team's metrics are through the roof this morning. Must be the end of quarter reports." She moved on. She came to my section. She paused, looking at her screen with a frown. "Strange," she muttered to herself. "Everyone here seems to be on edge too." In the end, she couldn't find a single calm male employee to volunteer for chili-pocalypse duty. The task ended up going to the office's external cleaning crew. We had won. It was a small victory, but it felt monumental. A quiet wave of triumphant texts filled the chat group. We started getting bolder. A tedious data entry project came up. Storm warning. Suddenly, our entire department was too stressed to handle it. The project was outsourced. The boss needed someone to assemble a new, complicated piece of office furniture. Looks like a hurricane of tiny screws. All male hands were, according to the data, too shaky for the task. The boss ended up doing it himself, cursing the whole time. Nina was getting frustrated. Her perfect system was failing. We could see her in her glass-walled office, staring at her dashboard, which was now a constant flickering sea of orange and red. She started holding wellness check-ins. She'd call us into her office one by one and ask, with that infuriatingly calm voice, why we were so stressed. We gave her perfect, corporate-approved answers. I'm just feeling the pressure of the upcoming deadlines, Nina. I'm trying to be more in tune with my emotions, like you suggested. I guess I have a lot of suppressed anxiety. This band has really helped me realize how much stress I was carrying. It's been a real eye-opener. She couldn't argue. We were using her own logic, her own buzzwords, against her. We were playing her game, but we had rigged the dice. The atmosphere in the office had completely changed. The resentment was gone, replaced by a silent, powerful sense of camaraderie. We were a brotherhood, united against a common, ridiculous enemy. We'd walk past each other in the halls and give a subtle nod. We were all in on the joke, and it was the funniest joke in the world. Yusuf was our unspoken leader. He was the one who kept us from getting too cocky. A storm is only effective if you can control it, he wrote in the chat. Don't trigger it for small things. Save your energy for the battles that matter. We didn't know it then, but the biggest battle of our lives was just around the corner. It began with a phone call, an angry phone call. Our biggest client, the one whose contract paid for half the office's salaries, was furious. A major software update we had rolled out was a complete disaster. It was crashing their systems, corrupting their data. The boss got off the phone looking pale. He called an emergency meeting. "This is a code red," he said, his voice grim. "They're threatening to pull the contract. We have until tomorrow morning to fix this, or we are in a world of trouble." He looked at the project lead. "What do we need?" "We need to roll back the update, sift through thousands of lines of code to find the bug, patch it, test it, and redeploy it. It's a massive job. It's an all-nighter, probably 2. The air in the room was thick with tension. This wasn't about cleaning a microwave. This was real. This was people's jobs on the line. The boss took a deep breath. "Okay, I need my A-team. I need the best, the sharpest, the most focused people we have. No distractions, no complaining. We pull this off, or we're all sunk." He turned, and, like a reflex, he looked straight at Nina. "Nina, I don't have time to mess around. Give me the names. Who is ready for this? Who is calm under pressure? Your system was made for this exact moment." Every eye in the room turned to her. This was her time to shine. The moment her grand experiment would be validated. My phone vibrated in my pocket. A single message in the Weather Watch chat from Yusuf. "This is not a storm. This is the apocalypse." Nina puffed up with pride. She confidently lifted her tablet, ready to read out the names of the chosen ones. I glanced around at the guys. A quiet, almost imperceptible series of movements began. Hands slipped into pockets. Feet started to jiggle under the conference table. Someone let out a long, slow breath, while surreptitiously pressing his wrist against the metal leg of his chair. We had all been calm. The gravity of the situation had focused us, but our bracelets were about to tell a very, very different story. Nina tapped on her screen. Her confident smile faltered. She blinked. She tapped again, refreshing the page. The frown on her face deepened. "That's odd," she murmured. "What is it, Nina?" the boss said, his patience wearing thin. "Give me the names." "Well," she started, her voice suddenly uncertain. "According to the real-time biometric data, every single male employee in this department is currently experiencing extreme, critical levels of stress." The boss stared at her. "What?" "Their metrics they're off the charts. I've never seen anything like it. It's a complete anomaly. The whole dashboard is red. It looks like they're all about to have a simultaneous nervous breakdown." The boss looked around the room. He saw me, sitting perfectly still. He saw Rohan, calmly looking at his laptop. He saw Yusuf, who was leisurely examining his fingernails. We were a picture of tranquility. We were a pond of glass. But Nina's tablet was screaming that we were a raging tsunami. "A breakdown?" the boss roared, his face turning purple. "Nina, look at them. They're the calmest people in this building. I'm the one having a breakdown." "But the data is objective," she insisted, her voice getting high-pitched with panic. "The system says they are not emotionally equipped to handle any additional pressure. Assigning them this task could be a psychological liability." The boss's phone rang. It was the client. He answered it, his expression growing darker with every passing second. He hung up. He looked at Nina with a terrifying, cold fury. "The client is giving us 1 hour to provide them with a dedicated, round-the-clock team, or they're walking. To hell with your data." He pointed at Rohan. You're on it." Rohan looked up with a placid expression. "Sir, I'd love to help. But as Nina's own system indicates, I'm really not feeling up to it. I'm feeling quite overwhelmed." The boss pointed at me. "Jack!" I adopted a look of pained exhaustion. "I'm sorry, sir. My wellness band has made me realize I need to respect my emotional limits. Nina's program has taught me that." One by one, he went around the room. One by one, every man gave a polite, calm, and utterly infuriating refusal, citing the very system that was supposed to make us better workers. We were broken, we explained. We were too stressed. The data proved it. Nina was in a full-blown panic. Her system, her masterpiece, the thing that was supposed to prove her progressive genius, had completely paralyzed the entire department in its moment of greatest need. She started pleading. "Please, can't you just try? The data might be wrong for once." Yusef looked up from his nails. "But Nina," he said, his voice laced with mock concern. "You told us the data was objective. You told us our feelings were irrelevant. Are you now suggesting we should ignore the science?" It was a perfect checkmate. The boss threw his hands up in the air in utter defeat and fury. He stormed out of the room, yelling into his phone that he was handling it personally. Nina stood alone in the middle of the room, holding her tablet. Her face was pale. She looked from the sea of red on her screen to the faces of the calm, uncooperative men surrounding her. For the first time, she looked genuinely stressed, and she didn't have a bracelet to prove it. The next morning, a new email was waiting in our inboxes. It was from the CEO. The subject line was, "Conclusion of the Biometric Wellness Pilot Program." The email was short and brutal. It stated that, after a thorough review, the pilot program was being terminated, effective immediately, as it had failed to produce the desired synergistic outcomes and negatively impacted operational agility. It was the most corporate way of saying, "Your stupid idea almost destroyed the company." An hour later, a woman from HR, who we'd never seen before, came around with a cardboard box. She didn't say a word. She just walked up to each male employee's desk and pointed at the box. The feeling was indescribable. With a sense of ceremony, I unstrapped the black plastic shackle from my wrist. It had been a part of me for months, a constant source of anxiety. I dropped it into the box. It made a cheap, hollow clatter. It was a beautiful sound. All around the office, the same sound was repeated. Clatter, 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 the sound of our freedom. When the box was full, the woman took it and left. And just like that, it was over. Nina was gone by the end of the week. We heard she resigned to pursue other opportunities. The office went back to normal, or a new kind of normal. The air felt lighter. The quiet sense of brotherhood that had formed during our rebellion remained. We had been through a war together. A stupid, pointless corporate war, but a war nonetheless. That afternoon, I was sitting with Rohan and Yusef in the newly cleaned kitchen. Yusef was sipping his tea, looking out over the office floor. He took a slow, deliberate sip. "And so," he said, a rare, genuine smile touching the corners of his mouth. "A valuable lesson was learned by all." Rohan and I looked at him, waiting. Never underestimate the power of a unified group of men who are tired of being treated like problems to be solved.